Hey y'all, Freeze Cracked here. I'm going to try and stay specifically on one topic today. I keep trying to think of things that I haven't covered very well because I don't just want to, try and endlessly show napping. So today is talking about pressure flaking and why some people can't get pressure flakes to run. I have people tell me this, oh, I just can't get my pressure flakes to run. And there's a number of variables in pressure flaking, and so I'm gonna cover a few of them and try to assist with that issue. Okay, first of all, I don't usually nap slabs. I usually start off with cobbles, occasionally spalls. But I can nap slabs, I do nap slabs, but I don't try and make it look like fog work or anything like that. I just use the slab as a conservation of material if it's a type of material that you can't get in big blocks or that it would be wasting a huge amount of money or something. But anyway, pressure flaking. Here's the deal. First thing to know as you progress is how far can you reliably push flakes and can you thin with pressure. If you can't, then you have to figure out a way to get down to a stage where all you're doing is finishing the edges, and you can do that with percussion and just have edge retouch with pressure. But to get good pressure work, the first thing is to know, like for instance, if you've gotten your piece of work down to this, well, you haven't accomplished anywhere close to enough to to where you want to attempt to do anything with pressure. This may seem obvious, but there are a lot of nappers out there that are not pushing their pressure flakes routinely past the midline of their point or preform, and if you're not pushing them past the midline, you're not thinning. So even on smaller little preforming stuff, and this is just junk that's laying on a table here, so I didn't actually select any of this stuff to be good examples, but even on smaller, this is raw stuff, and this is pretty tough material here, and this is definitely tough material here, and neither one of these are particularly good candidates for pressure thinning because they are not brittle enough to where it's easy to flake them, and also there's quite a bit of convexity here. And so when you have a lot of convexity and you've got thickness and stuff, on tough rock, trying to push your flakes through that is difficult because the flakes want to run up it and run out. And if you want to keep them from doing that, you have to put support on the face, and that tends to break off right there. So we'll get to that in a minute. All right. Basically I've shown pressure work on a notch pad, and I've shown pressure work on leather. It is much trickier and more difficult to learn to master working on leather, but it has huge advantages for certain situations. And so I think it's necessary. With the notch pad is what most people use. The technique is important to learn. First of all, you got to have a big enough notch to make sure that your flakes don't touch it at all when they're coming off, because that'll stop them. But I like, which I've said before, I like this grabby rubber, and I've got it glued to what is a bedliner material backer that is not going to be hurt by the pressure tool at all, and it comes up a little higher than the pad to try and protect my hand if I accidentally slid across. I don't tend to put much pressure that way, but I do sometimes when I'm doing beveling flakes. Okay, but here's the deal. What normally happens when people are making short flakes is that the direction of force on the edge is not straight across the face. The direction is inward, which is always a short flake. And sometimes it tricks the person doing it by them not realizing that when they put huge pressure on the piece, they let it roll. And when they let it roll, then they're no longer, at the last split second when that flake goes, they're no longer pushing across the face, but the direction of force has changed and pushing inward. And I think I've said that before, but that's a critical point of all this. Another critical point is, if you're, okay, let's see here, see if I can find one. Okay, like this right here. The edge is right at, why am I not focusing? See if I can get it to focus at all. Okay, well, that's focusing, but the edge right there is right at the center line of this point. When it's at the center line, you cannot make long flakes. You cannot make them go across the point unless you're doing it on leather and have a lot of knowledge about how to make that redirect across the face and run across the face without hinging out too soon. So if you're making your edges look like this and you're not pushing flakes far on a notch pad, well, the reason is because you can't. Think about it. If you need to push far and you want to push all the way across the face, well, if your edge is at the center line, you'd have to push straight through the piece. That's not going to happen. The trade-off is that you push a little bit outward. Well, when you do that, your flake is just going to run the other flakes that are already there and come up and feather terminate right in here somewhere, because the flake has no support or anything on it to make it dive back down and follow across the curve of the convexity and go to the other side. It'll do that on leather. It won't do that just because you want it to change the direction when it gets to the top of the hill. It doesn't do that. So, can you push flakes longer than these? Yes, you can, off of this edge, and that's why this is close to the center line. Actually, I probably hadn't turned it. I don't remember what the deal was on it. But the way that I have a tendency to work slabs, this is ortho quartzite, probably from Colorado or somewhere. The way I have a tendency to work slabs is I do short little flakes, and I start establishing some convexity to keep the flakes from just running wide and hinging out and putting hinges halfway in or something that's a problem. And then the next set I do longer flakes, and the next set I do even longer flakes. So that's how I do that. And so that's why this looks like it does. But the trick and the phasing of some of this kind of stuff is don't do things that stymie you from being able to do the next thing. You know, think 3 steps ahead or something. People want to hurry up and get the ground surface off of, the cut surface off of their points, and they just try and sometimes blast flakes a long ways and then trim the edges. That's backwards of how I do it. And it looks real slabby even if you pull it off. So anyway, this other slab, by the way, this similar kind of treatment, but you can see I just finished kind of zigzagging the edges of this, so it's not very regularized yet. This is a piece of Western jasper. One of the problems that you have with tough material is you have to push harder. A problem you have with brittle material is the same as if you pushed harder, and that is it's weak, and so you get more bulbing. When it's tough and you push hard, you get more bulbing, and when it's really brittle and weak, you get more bulbing. Well, all of that is bad for your next series of flakes, because what happens when you have a rolled edge, I'm trying to see if I have a, okay, this is kind of a good example. the bottom side of this side of it, that's where the last set was taken off. So now what you can see is on that side, it's kind of rolled downward at these deltas especially, and this is a pretty tough rock, so you got some fairly big bulbs in there. You can't push back to this side without fixing that. You have to abrade downward. So you would take it, you can either sit there and pick all that stuff off with your pressure flaker, or you can try and take it off with, you can just take, I use a little solid copper to turn the edges sometimes, like this. So you can take that and just lock your hand at one place on your leg and just barely, try to get this to focus. You can just barely catch it and take some of those deltas off. The other thing you can do is take a really coarse abrader and just barely catch it and take some of those deltas off. But anyway, once you've done all that, the next thing I do is go with a medium abrader, and I'll take and tilt this backwards and go like that to just raise the edge a little bit without doing a bunch of little hinging and stuff under here. Then, to get the last little vestiges of hanging down kind of deltas and stuff off and straighten the edge if you want to a little bit, you can go at this angle, and that just raises the very front lip of it. But when you go to push, you have to watch what you're pushing on, and unless you take a fine little flaker and carefully regularize everything. And if you do that, you're going to have it where this is just not wanting to focus. If you do that, you're going to have it to where you don't have any ridges left and your flakes don't want to run and all the flakes want to go wide. The way you avoid that is by starting at one end and creating your own ridges with each flake and running the ridge from the previous flake. So if you get it really smooth, and it seems like a problem in that regard, I mean, if you want a really fine parallel flaked, parallel oblique or whatever, or ribbon flake type surface, that's what you do. You get it almost like a ground preform by taking careful selective flakes until everything is perfectly like you want it, and then you run down the row. Okay, so anyway, one of the problems that you have with not running your flakes very far is they break. If your flakes are breaking, either your contours aren't right, or your platform isn't right and failing and just hinging down and breaking close to the edge. But another thing that happens is sometimes the flakes are thin. If you don't run a ridge, then your flake tends to fan out. If it fans out, it runs thinner while it's fanning. When it runs thin to a certain point, the energy on it is such, if there's any convexity at all, that it breaks and you get a little hinge. Okay, so anyway, I'm not talking really well today. Some days I do better than others. A key thing that I do is I use my legs a lot because I'm not all that strong. The other key thing that I try and do is I try and push largely perpendicular to the face. Like this, I point the tip backwards toward the back of the thing, and I lever in really hard and control the preform where it can't move, and then I'm pushing like this way, and it's hard to cheat that because if you get it almost perpendicular enough, it doesn't have that tendency to make it roll on you, and especially if you control the back edge well, it tends to go pretty good. I tend to use an Ishii stick to generate power in early stages of reduction, but it's harder to get that great angle like I want it with the Ishii stick. I cant my hand backwards. when I'm pushing on it, But even so, you can tell probably from that angle, it's about like this, it's not like that. And so a lot of times on my last set of flakes, if I'm wanting to really run them, make them go and almost shoot off the other side, I'll switch to leather and I'll switch to a hand flaker and get a lot of pressure going with a hand flaker and roll into it really hard and bite into it. Okay, anyway, let's I'll be right back.